Welcome to the Museum of Mormon History of the Americas. For more than 25 years, we have been collecting and preserving the Latin history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now we are able to exhibit and make it known to the general public free of charge. As members of the LDS Church, we have served in many capacities in the Philippines, in Mexico, in Chile, and the United States. The first exhibit area that we have is Finding Refuge in El Paso. It has to do with the colonies that were sent down by John Taylor in 1885 because of the problems the U.S. had with the church at that time. They were there for 25 years developing quite an economy, but the Mexican Revolution of 1910 forced them to come back into the U.S. It explains where they were locating for property to colonize. And then over here is a letter from Brother McDonald in 1890, very detailed instructions as to how to get to Mexico. Once they were there, they established 9 colonies, 6 in Chihuahua and 3 in Sonora. But like I said, the revolution forced the men to come out in horseback, and the ladies and children, they came out by train. On the panels, you will find testimonies and lots of pictures of those particular events that happened in the late 1800s or early 1900s. On this table are books that were donated by Moses Techer, the apostle that was in charge of the colonies at that time. Books that are of the church from the 1800s, such as Book of Mormon, hymn books, Pearl of Great Price, etc. The mayor of El Paso, Texas, was the one that received them and provided transportation and other means while they were trying to decide what would come next in their lives. Some of them decided to make their new homes in El Paso, Texas, and build a church there. Others migrated west where they had relatives, and some did return to Mexico. Some of the early members that were baptized in the central of Mexico included the Rivera sisters and the Zúñiga Bautista family. They were moved to the colonies because of the gathering to Zion, but the revolution also forced them to come back into the U.S., and they formed the first Spanish-speaking branch in Salt Lake City in 1922. In this area, we have 3 beautiful paintings that were done by Irene Becerril, an international artist who donated them to us in Mexico City in 1991 when we opened the museum. This first one is the 2 Jesus that are painted, one in red because Isaiah says that he will come dressed in red. And this one talks about the 3 Josephs, Joseph from Egypt, Joseph Smith, and Joseph from the Book of Mormon, along with many of the ordinances that are done in the restored gospel. The last one here is Mormon giving the plates to his son Moroni, with the iniquity on one side and the light of the gospel on the other side. Here we have a map of Mexico today, with 34 missions, 13 temples, an MTC, and now 230 different stakes. When I was a young missionary, my mission covered all of this area. Now there are 5 missions. So we can see the growth that has exploded not only in Mexico, but also in Central and South America. In this area, we have the translation of the Book of Mormon into Spanish. The first translation of the Book of Mormon was only 100 pages, and it was done in 1875 when Brigham Young called the first translators Daniel W. Jones and Melitón González Trejo. Once the book was printed, the first missionaries went to Mexico in 1876. The complete edition of the Book of Mormon was done in 1886. Then there's other editions that were published later, 1920, 29, 42, and 46. On the wall, you're going to find paintings of the life of the prophet Joseph as he was working on the Book of Mormon, as well as newspapers that were published in Mexico that detailed the history and the doctrine of the Mormon Church as early as 1844. Argentina is the second country that has more history because Germans from the World War I migrated to Argentina and solicited missionaries to come and preach the gospel. And so these are the early beginnings, the early members of the church in Argentina. This is an animated presentation of the translation of the Book of Mormon into Spanish. Daniel W. Jones and Meliton Gonzalez Trejo explain how they became available in being able to translate the book. Then later, James Evelyn Stewart and Meliton Trejo do the complete Book of Mormon translation in 1886. On the screen, you will see a lot of the history that was published in Mexico in the newspapers and how the book was actually translated. These are some of the pictures of the early members of the church that were baptized in the late 1800s or early 1900s. And these are some of the brethren that helped the Anglo missionaries that were sent down to start preaching the gospel in Mexico. And here we have in this table some postcards, diaries, and other items from James Evelyn Stewart, the translator of the Book of Mormon. And you can see some of the old adobe buildings that they used for their meeting house. This picture represents the reason why we have the museum. This is my father, this is my aunt. My grandmother met the missionaries in 1923 and they were baptized in 1925. She was a school teacher, and because of her education, she kept a very humble but very spiritual collection of the beginnings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Mexico. When she passed away, that was our inheritance, and we decided that we would keep it in ourselves to be able to perform the museum, and over 25 years, this is what we have done. This is a conference in Cuernavaca in 1903 with the local members and the foreigners. These are the missionaries in the background. This is a relief society with the mission mother, Sister Harris, the peers, and the missionaries with the local sisters. And this is the first members of the church in Puebla with Sister Chichilla, the Sandoval, Zacarias, and the missionaries here in the background. This meeting took place 115 years ago. It comes from the diary of Eman Tenney, who served 3 missions in Mexico. The sacrament table is from San Marcos Hidalgo, and Brother Zúñiga and Brother Barco are administering the sacrament. As you can see, the trays were made by the brethren as they were able to understand the need of passing the sacrament. The piano comes from the state of Hidalgo, and then there's other artifacts that we've collected over the years. Now come and join me and sit down in these benches that were made in the state of Puebla, and sit with Sister Monroy and Brother Sandoval to listen to Elder Tenney's sermon as he restores the missionary effort in Mexico. This exhibit is about the first Mexican that comes to Salt Lake City in 1884. He's a world traveler, well-educated, apparently with means to travel, and he comes and goes to the tabernacle and likes what he saw there. So he decides to meet with the prophet, and he knocks on the door of the secretary and asks for an interview with the prophet. For several hours he is asking questions, and the prophet is answering. His granddaughter later plays the piano, and he does an encore also on the piano. When the visitor goes back to Mexico, he publishes all the notes that he had recorded on his notebook, indicating that he had a great time understanding what the Mormons were all about. Before we leave this area, let me show you this table has some of the early hymn books in Spanish, Doctrine and Covenants, and some diaries. This picture shows the second building that was built by the church in the late 1930s in the capital of Mexico, and the first conference with the prophet George Albert Smith. The congregation here represents basically the number of Mormons that lived in Mexico in 1946. And in this picture, I am here as a 6-year-old boy with my brother Richard, my sister Albia, my mother, and my younger sister Ruth. My father was the photographer, so he didn't come out in the picture. Some of the Central American and Latin American countries have a little bit of history, and we're starting to document that. These are manuals that were used in the different organizations of the church, missionaries that served in Mexico from 1901 to 1913, magazines that were the evolution of how we got to the Lajona, and other manuals and things here on the hallway. This is the registration of the church officially in Mexico in 1993. Thank you for your visit. We hope you enjoyed it. Invite others for us, and if you would like to make a comment on our guest book, you are welcome to do so.